Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle. I'm your host, Marianne, and whether you're new to the show or returning, thank you so much for making this show part of your day. Today, we're talking about something that touches more of us than we might realize. What it means to discover later in life that your brain works differently. My guest, Jorie Houlihan, knows that experience firsthand. After decades of being dismissed by doctors, feeling like she was floundering from one career to the next and carrying labels like lazy or inconsistent, Jorie was diagnosed with ADHD at 49. That moment was a turning point, but the real transformation came when she stopped trying to fit into systems designed for neurotypical brains and started creating ones that worked for hers. Today, Jorie is known as the Guide for the Dopamine Deprived, an ADHD life coach, public speaker, and educator who specializes in helping women diagnosed later in life understand their brains, rebuild confidence, and thrive. She's the host of the new podcast, ADHD and with Jorie Houlihan, a podcast for women who were diagnosed later in life or suspect that they might have ADHD and are ready for real-life tactical strategies, no fluffy hacks, no shame, just help that sticks. Jorie's on a mission to help women diagnosed later in life move from simply surviving to thriving. And together we're talking about what it means to unlearn old narratives, rebuild confidence, and finally understand that your brain isn't broken. It's just different. Jorie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very, very much.
You've obviously openly now shared that you've been diagnosed with ADHD at 49 and that changed everything for you. So can you take us back, set the stage? What did it feel like to finally get that diagnosis that you'd struggled with for years, and sort of how did that come about?
Yeah. So the first time I tried to talk to a doctor about it, I was 18 or 19. I was there for something else. And he said, "So is there anything else you want to talk about while you're here?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." But then when I was trying to explain it, it's like, how do you explain this to people who don't have it? And it just felt like mush coming out of my mouth. And I thought, oh my God, I'm literally the epitome of the ditzy dumb blonde right now. Like that's what it sounded like to me. And he didn't help. He's like, well, you're in college now. And I'm like, oh, okay. And over the years, I would bring it up on occasion with the doctor, and I was always just dismissed. And I was always given some form of, well, you just have too much on your plate, kind of a thing. But I'm looking at the plates of the people in my life, and I'm like, I don't have too much. What? And it just didn't make sense. And so I eventually just sort of thought, well, I guess I just don't adult well. And when I got into my 40s, I really started to get depressed. I was looking at my life and thinking, I just thought I would be doing so much more with this. It was mostly with career in particular, because I really was going from one thing to another thing. And I didn't understand why I couldn't seem to make anything stick. And I felt like I was just always on this hamster wheel. And COVID happened. And, for a lot of women with ADHD, that was the beginning of them going, wait a minute, because all of our worlds sort of converged into one, and now we couldn't just, fake it till we make it, right?
Yeah.
And TikTok became a big thing, and I was avoiding it because I'm like, I will totally get addicted to this. I can see that already. But then my husband ended up on it, which was weird because he didn't really like social media at all. And then eventually I went on and immediately ended up in ADHD TikTok. And it wasn't the typical things you hear about ADHD, right? It wasn't the forgetfulness or, squirrel kind of things. It was out of sight, out of mind. And that included people. That was a big one for me because I was like, oh, wow. Okay, that explains a few things. It was how we communicate. It was just so many of these other things that I'd never heard of that were connected to ADHD. And I thought, well, I'm not self-diagnosing myself from TikTok videos. And and I know a lot of people have, but I was like, no, I need to know, And the final thing that finally made me get assessed was I am in a mastermind with two women, and I don't know what I did that day, but I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I think I have ADHD, kind of half joking. And one of the women said, actually, I think you do. And I think that's why you struggle so much, and you're always going to flounder until you get this figured out.
Wow. Wow.
And it was literally the thing that changed my life. The word flounder, I cannot express enough how much that really hit me, because that's what it felt like. I felt like I was just floundering all the time, trying to find something that would stick and thinking I was just doing it wrong. Right. And I was lazy, and I was just being entitled, or, I was just not smart enough to make things work. And it turns out this woman also had ADHD. She had also been diagnosed late. So she saw exactly what was happening with me and was like, girl, you need to get assessed. Wow. But it was COVID, so that made it a little more challenging. So I had to go through an online company to do it, but it got the ball rolling. And, when I was first diagnosed, it was weirdly enough a little anticlimactic. I would have been more surprised if they had said I didn't have it. And there was this part of me that was like, but what if they're wrong? Like, it was easier for me to believe that I was stupid and lazy rather than I just have a brain difference. And I thought that was kind of a weird thing to I was like, why would my brain immediately go to the negative? And then I learned later that like we have a tendency to, catastrophize and that kind of thing. But it changed everything, because then, I immediately recognized there was nothing out there for women like me. It was all geared towards adolescent boys, and there was nothing out there for middle-aged women. And so I was like, well, then I guess I'll do it. And so that's sort of how I ended up in this world. I didn't want other women having to finally get an answer and then have no way of doing anything about it. And so I thought, well, I'll do my little part, and hopefully that'll be enough to at least get them started, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, fill that niche. Well, it's interesting because, as you said, there's nothing out there for women. Often, you probably know this now, but obviously, because it happened to you, but often girls don't get diagnosed. As I told you before we started recording, I have a daughter that has been diagnosed, but it took years. Like, I didn't even know, and we'll talk about obviously some of the signs and such, but what a frustrating period of time as a parent, thinking like there was silly things like, she'd bust her butt doing a project and doing the homework or doing the report, and then forget to pass it in. As a mom, I'm like banging my head against the wall going, yeah, is this like you just trying to push back? Are you, going through this era? Like, what's this all about? Mm-hmm. And it took a really long time to get the diagnosis. And when it did, as I'm sure you're going to share as we continue, but so many light bulbs go off. But when you don't know, and I guess all this to say, I now know it's very common for girls to not get diagnosed because they don't often, even if they have ADHD, I guess they don't often show that sort of hyperactivity in the same way that boys do. So I didn't know that. So it makes sense to me that so many women now are getting diagnosed later in life. But let's talk a little bit. You touched on a couple of things that are probably not the typical symptoms. So we all have heard of the sort of, I'll say scatterbrain, kind of like all over the place, chase the squirrel, I think you said, whatever, squirrel. Those kind of things. Yeah. But what are some of the things that people might not recognize or might not be aware could, and we're not doctors, we're not here to tell you, diagnose anybody, but from your experience, what are some of those symptoms that are less recognizable?
Yes. So, and this will actually touch on some of the things you talked about with your daughter about why girls and women are missed, is because our symptoms are very different from boys. Like boys' symptoms are very outward and disruptive, right? That's why they're caught so early. But girls are taught to mask really early, just in general, right? And so,
yeah.
So regardless of whether or not you have ADHD, girls are taught to mask anything that isn't considered socially acceptable. And so we learn how to mask really well, which makes it harder for people in authority, like teachers and people like that, to recognize those symptoms. But also a lot of teachers are still looking for boys' symptoms in girls. So girls, generally speaking, tend to be they're diagnosed more with the inattentive presentation. I was diagnosed with the combined presentation. So I have enough of the hyperactive and the inattentive for both. Regardless, even if you have the inattentive presentations, most of them have some shades of the hyperactive impulsive, but signs like interrupting all the time, being super chatty. Like if you were a chatty Cathy, yeah, that's one form of the hyperactivity. It's also for women, especially inattentive, the just racing thoughts, like your brain doesn't stop, or it feels like it doesn't stop, but you think this is normal. You think this is how it is for everybody.
Yeah.
But it isn't. When people say, what are you thinking about? And they say nothing, for neurotypicals, they sometimes actually mean that. And I'm like, wait, you have nothing going through your head?
Yeah.
Like I always have, even with medication, I still have things going through my head. How does that even work? For girls, it can also be just like the messy desk, the messy room, because it's a lot of executive dysfunction, right? Not being able to be organized, things like forgetting to turn in the homework, right? Both my kids have it. And my son, that was like, oh, he's like, I did that homework. I'm like, well, they're saying you didn't have it. And he's like, oh, I forgot to turn it in. Hold on. Because, he had to just click the button, but it was the one step, and I was like, oh my God, how do you do all that work and then forget to turn it in?
Right.
Because that was not me. Right. I was like, thank God it's done. But it is much more subtle when you have the inattentive presentation, which is what most women are. And I have found recently, men who have inattentive presentation are also often not caught younger as well. And it's for the same reasons. It's just much more subtle. It's the forgetfulness, and it's always dismissed as something else, like, oh, you're just so scattered. Right. And sometimes people will say, well, I forget things too sometimes, or I can't focus sometimes too. And I'm like, yeah, it's the sometimes that is the key indicator there, right? I am like this every single day, multiple times a day, depending, whatever the symptom is. Like, it is a huge part of my life. It's not a sometimes kind of thing. And that's what really separates it. And that's what makes it so hard to diagnose sometimes, is because there's symptoms that everybody does experience on some level, but it's when it goes from, for some people, like I said, sometimes you're probably not ADHD, but if it's all the time, or it's, it's disruptive in your life, that's when you really need to get it checked. And girls do get missed all the time. My daughter was being missed. I had to really advocate to get her assessed. And then they're like, oh yeah, no, she has it. I was like, yes, I know. That's what I'm telling you. But hers looks completely different than my son's. My son is exactly what you think of when you think of ADHD, right? Like, he's just disruptive and he's loud. And I used to look at him when he was diagnosed, because he was diagnosed 4 years before I was. And I'd look at him and go, well, but I don't act like that, because he was like, a kid with too much sugar in his system, but he hardly ever has any sugar in his system. So I'm like, well, that's not me. And I didn't recognize that my ADHD was me sitting on the couch, doom scrolling on my phone, but in my head going, just go do the thing. Just go do the thing. Why can't I do the thing? I'm so lazy. Just go do the thing. And that was part of my ADHD. So that's why it looks different. And that's why it's missed very often in women. Sorry, that was a very long explanation for that. We also go off on tangents.
Well, that's okay, because I think it's so important that the way you're describing it is, it's a spectrum. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but there's all kinds of ways it can present. And I do think we forget that, or I think somebody that's probably trying to figure it out is doing exactly what you just said. They're researching and they're going, well, I don't quite fit this and I don't quite fit that. So it's really important to make sure we recognize that it can look different for everybody. And I think also sometimes it comes in combination with something else too, so which that can then make it look even more different. So important to know. As an adult though, I'm curious, what's the importance of having a diagnosis? Because when you're in school, you need the diagnosis to get IEPs or special services or considerations, whatever you call it in your school district. But as an adult, why is it so important? What if you just knew?
So that is a really, really good question. So actually, ADHD is part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So in the workplace, in college, if you're an adult, you can still ask for accommodations. Reasonable accommodations is what they call it. And so that part, just in terms of like on a practical day-to-day work kind of thing, a lot of people hesitate to talk to HR about their ADHD because they worry that they'll suddenly be seen as incompetent when we're really not. But if we're in the right environment, we can knock things out of the park, right? So having the right environment for yourself in terms of a job, in terms of a work environment, in terms of an educational environment, that is really important because you want to set yourself up for success.
Yeah.
And ADHD is not usually part of an IEP. It's usually a 504. And it's, at least in Illinois, it's an automatic 504. Like the second you get that diagnosis, if you have autism, which also it's not with everybody, but it's much more prevalent than they used to think. They used to think if you had autism, you couldn't have ADHD. And now they know there's a lot of overlap in the symptoms, actually. That is an IEP. And the other reason that you want to know as an adult is because getting that diagnosis was so validating. I was in that 99% sure category most of my life. And there's a big difference with that 1%, because that 1% was a difference between I have a brain difference or I'm just a lazy person who needs to get her act together.
Yeah.
Two very different ways of looking at yourself.
Yeah.
And when you get that diagnosis as an adult, first of all, it opens up treatment plans or programs you would not have access to otherwise, like medication, things like that. And even if you don't do medication, you still want to understand how your brain works. That's the number one thing I work on with my clients. Like in the very beginning, we're working on self-awareness, because for people whose brains want to pay attention to everything, we are spectacularly unself-aware. and so they'll go, wait, that's ADHD. Oh, that's ADHD? Like all or nothing thinking. That can be part of ADHD. And so they go, oh, and then they start to look at like decisions they're making or how they're looking at a situation, right? And they go, oh, wait, this is what she was talking about. Okay, now I'm getting emotional dysregulation is a big part of ADHD, even though it's not in the DSM. I'm really hoping they change that one quickly because it is such a big part of it. And people are just, they're just dismissed as too something. They're too much. They're too sensitive. They're too whatever. But ADHD is in large part a self-regulation struggle. Our brains actually want to pay attention to everything. We can't always regulate where that attention goes. We experience emotionally things on a much stronger level than a neurotypical person. And we can't always regulate how that happens or how we react to it. And so if you know now, okay, so I know that when I go into this social situation, I tend to get very overstimulated and I tend to get really like this. Okay, now you know that. So what are some things you can do before you go into that situation? If you know you're going into that, is it a situation you even need to go into? And if you find yourself in it and suddenly you're in that, what are some things you can do to try to regulate yourself, before you blow up at somebody or, end up in tears somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So just understanding that there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's just how your body processes that information. And now that you know that, you can put some systems together to put some guardrails around things that are challenging, but also learning what your strengths are. And what's really sad to me is when I get a new client, I do an intake with them. And one of my questions is, what are your strengths? And I have yet to have somebody give me one.
Wow.
In that first appointment. Because by the time they come to see me, they are feeling completely lost. They're feeling completely broken and they don't think they have any. And I'm like, no, you have strengths. You just need to see where they are.
Yeah. And
I can tell you what your strengths are, but it doesn't matter if I see them. You have to see them and believe them. So that is also something that we work on.
Well, I love that for them.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to when you got diagnosed for a minute, because all of what you just said to, emulate how much of a big deal and how much of a relief it was and how it changed for the positive.
Mm-hmm.
I have to think there was probably a little bit of sadness, grief. I don't know the exact word because I didn't experience it, but that feeling of if only I had known. Regret, maybe, right? Those three words come to mind. Is
Yes.
that accurate?
Yes. The grief is a very real part of ADHD. And it's something that I think most women underestimate will happen when they get their diagnosis. For me, it didn't really kick in until I did start medication. Because when I didn't do medication right away because I thought, okay, now that I know what this is, I can totally handle this on my own. I could not. And the same friend that said, I think you have ADHD, she reached out a few months later, was like, you haven't started meds yet, have you? And I was like, is that obvious? She's like, yes, it's a little obvious. And so she's like, I don't think you're going to need that much. I'm like, all right, fine. So I talked to a prescriber about it. And so we got the ball rolling. And when I started doing medication, I was like, wait a second, this is what everyone else has been working with naturally? I was really angry actually in the beginning because I thought my life could look completely different if somebody had listened to me when I was 18 or 19, right?
Mm.
And that's not to say I'm very happy in terms of my marriage and my kids and that kind of thing, but I struggled with so many things, thinking that I was just stupid, thinking I was incapable, when it was just my brain processes information differently. But I had spent my entire life being told I was doing it wrong.
Yeah.
When I was just doing it the way my brain worked. And it doesn't mean that I would have come up with a wrong answer. I might have even come up with a better answer, just saying. But it really hits your confidence, and learning to trust yourself and your brain. That's tough. That's something that, I mean, I worked with therapists and coaching and all this stuff, and I still struggle with that. I still find myself hesitating sometimes and going, oh, wait, no. Okay, I know that I'm understanding how my brain works better now. Let me try it my way.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, and that's okay. But the grief is a very big part of it. And it's important to experience it, but it's also important not to get stuck in it. So I always recommend that people see a therapist in addition to coaching, because there's a lot to work through with that. And because ADHD impacts literally every single area of your life. It impacts your money, your relationships, your health, like everything. And when you start to go, oh, this is why I can't seem to get myself to do this. Oh, this is why I struggle with that. Now it isn't, oh, I'm just so lazy and I'm just so stupid and da 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 da. Now it's, oh, now I'm better understanding why this is happening. Okay, now what can I do about it? And the therapy is great because they can deal with the things that as a coach I can't. And it's a lot. It's a big deal. And it's not something, I don't want people to like freak out and then shy away from it, because it's so liberating when you really come to embrace your ADHD. I have seen people go, I'm going to fight this thing. And I'm like, I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but that's a fight you're going to lose.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't going away.
Yeah.
You have to learn to dance with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say it's like every other thing, but anything any of us have as a difference or something, you learn to work. Once you recognize it, you learn to work around it or with it. You just have to sometimes go at things differently, but knowing is half the battle in getting in there.
It really is. It really is.
You mentioned medication, and I just want to circle back because I know, just because I do my research, I know that you're not like a huge advocate. You must take medication.
Right.
I think it's a personal choice. I think you say it's a personal choice. I know people that have taken it and then stopped taking it. And now I know people that sometimes take it if they need it. Like you said, if I'm going into a conference or I'm going somewhere, so you can manage it however works for you. I just don't want anybody to walk away hearing you say that and thinking, oh, she mastered her life because she took medication.
No.
Sure, it helped in your case. You needed it, but go ahead.
What I was going to say is there are some people who can't take the medication for various reasons. There are some people who don't want to, and that's fine too. And I am a big believer that pills don't teach skills. You still have to learn the skills. Like, medication should not be your only tool.
Yeah.
And in my case, though, I needed the pills to learn the skills because I couldn't retain information long enough. I couldn't focus long enough to really learn and practice the things. And I remember, when my regular doctor took over my prescription, and you have to do a med check every 3 months to make sure, because if you don't have ADHD, it can be highly addictive. It works differently in our brains. And again, I'm not a doctor. I can't explain exactly why it's so different for us. But you have to go in every 3 months for a med check. And she'll say, so are you taking it on the weekend? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, oh, why? And I'm like, well, my ADHD doesn't take a vacation on the weekend. Like, and we're supposed to, it didn't get the memo. And she kind of laughed and she's like, I didn't really think about it like that. But like you said, there are some people, they'll take it for school or they'll take it while they're at work, but then they don't do it like maybe on the weekends.
Yeah.
I do try to give myself a break, every once in a while and take a few days off or a week off. But I try to do it when I have nothing going on because, but it is a very personal choice. And like you said, I don't tell people, oh, you have to, but I do ask people to get themselves educated on it with accurate information, because like I was worried about addiction. I was worried about like all these things. And when I talked to the doctor about it, she started to explain to me how this was different, et cetera, et cetera. So I felt better about the decision. Now you may get all that information and still say, you know what, I'm still not comfortable with it. Then that's okay too. I don't want people to do things they're not comfortable with. I just want to make sure they're doing it with the right information.
Absolutely. Completely informed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to you alluded to systems, building systems. And I know that's one of the things that you promote, right? Is learning to navigate this world with systems that actually work for the way your brain works. Talk to us a little bit about what that looked like. So give us an example. What does that look like for you? What does that look like maybe for somebody you're working with?
Yeah. So for me, for example, out of sight, out of mind is by far my biggest struggle. If I don't see it, it does not exist. If I have an appointment and it's not in my calendar, it does not exist. If I have a bill to pay and something gets put on top of it, it doesn't exist. So I have to put things in place that come up in front of me regularly. So for example, like I'll have an amazing idea while I'm driving and I'll say, oh, I don't need to write that down because this is such a great idea, but I'm driving. So even if I wanted to write it down, I can't. But then I learned that I can use my phone and say, hey, remind me when I get home about this idea. Yeah. And then every time I come home, that will pop up. I also, though, know that systems work until they don't. And if you have ADHD, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And because the novelty wears off, right? Or we start to tune things out. And so I also know I have to change things up every once in a while. Mm. And so like if I have like a sticky note to remind myself of something on my computer screen, after a while, my brain won't see it anymore. And so what I will have to do is say, okay, I'm going to change this to another color sticky, or I'm going to make it a reminder that will come up on my phone. I just have to change it up every once in a while. I had one client who, this is my favorite story. So she wanted to start, she was always losing her keys. And so she said, I have this beautiful bowl that I bought and I want to put my keys in this bowl. I have this table that goes along our staircase and I want to put it in there when I walk in the front door. And I don't know why she didn't park in her garage, but she didn't. And I'm like, okay. So we were trying different things and nothing was really working that would make her meet, because she would just walk right past it because that's just all her brain knew at that point. So I said, okay, we're going to go big and we're going to go bold and you're probably not going to like it, but I just want you to try it. She's like, okay. I said, I want you to go to the store and I want you to buy a poster board and some crayons, markers, glitter, neon, whatever you can find that's going to really get your attention. And on that sign, I want you to write, put keys in here now, with a giant arrow pointing down to the bowl. And I saw her face just going, oh my God.
That's what I'm
and
thinking.
I said, I know. And I'm like, and I know you're already worried about what the neighbors are going to think, right? She's like, well, because they can see in that front window. I go, well, first of all, a lot of them are going to go, huh, I should probably do that. Right. So I said, look, let's just do it and see what happens. Your brain is very stubborn. Let's just see if this works. So it did. She only needed it for like a day and a half because she was so embarrassed about having it there that it just was this thing where like, it was more so she could get rid of the sign than anything else.
Oh, I love that.
But she started to put her keys in there because that was the thing that got her to do it.
I love that. And it stuck after the sign was gone. I love that.
Stuck.
I love that.
So I was like, I wish I'd made her take a picture of the sign because I was like, oh, I love this story and I don't have a sign to show it.
It'd be a great slide when you're talking.
Right. But it was something that, I call it the defiant mind. And it's this phenomenon we have. And I think this is also prevalent in autism as well. I think the actual name for it is pervasive or psychological demand avoidance. But if there's something that you plan on doing, and you maybe even want to do it, if somebody tells you to do it before you get around to it, our brain immediately goes, well, we're not doing it now. Thanks. And it is stupid, but that's how it works. And so I have had to have like little conversations with this person in my head. I'm just like, look, like her name's Brenda. And I'm like, Brenda, this is not helping me. Why am I listening to you? You have never, ever done anything that's helped me. So I sometimes will have people do role play where they kind of, because they're like, I feel kind of stupid, but at the same time, they get a lot of anger out sometimes because that defiant mind is a very real thing for a lot of us. But that was sort of a weird case of that, where it was just like, because I was telling her to put the keys in there, right? We're going to do this, because she was telling herself to put the keys in there. Her brain's like, we're not doing it. We're not even going to see that bowl. But then when that part happened with the signs, even Brenda was like, all right, fine, I give, whatever. But there's just, when you can start to see those elements too, like, oh, okay, so this is why when I was planning on taking the garbage out, but then my spouse told me to do it, I just immediately was like, no.
So wild.
Isn't it wild?
Yes.
Again, that's more of a therapist thing as far as like explaining that, but it is a thing. And so it's just important. And I think sometimes that's why we also tend to become resistant to things like timers and alarms and reminders, because they're sort of telling you what to do.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't like that.
Yeah.
But like I said, when you can kind of have a little conversation, name it, I found that to be incredibly helpful, because it takes me out of the equation a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, look, Brenda, we got to have a talk. It's comical, first of all, and I laugh. And then
that's the part. It's comical. It lightens the whole situation.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that then tends to help me get things done, even when I feel like I'm being told to do it. So
I love that thought about the defiance. Well, not that I love it, but as a parent, I can tell you I experienced, and probably still do, even though she's 29, but experienced that. But also when I thought about what you said about, and I've seen this in others as well, jumping job to job to job, I can see where it would come into play with that as well. Because listen, almost always we have a boss somewhere in the food chain and you're going to have parameters that you were told to do X, Y, and Z. I can see how that automatically could, depending on how the communication happens, shift things. So that was a good one to be aware of.
Well, and with regards to jobs too, like not even just that, but just simply, people sometimes they lose jobs because they're late all the time, because we have time blindness. And so in the ADHD brain, time, there's now and there's not now, and not now doesn't exist. So anything in the future is in not now land. And so when you're like, oh, I have to leave in 15 minutes, in our brains, that's like 3 hours away a lot of times. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I'm already 15 minutes late for work, and they're running out the door. And so that can cause problems. Deadlines, like if same time blindness impacts the ability to plan long-term, because again, it's, oh, that's way down. Like I was always the last minute term paper person, because my brain was like, oh, that's way down the road.
Yeah.
And when I would try to do it early, then there was that defiance. No, you're not doing it now. You're not doing that now. And then you mentioned too, like, again, like how things are communicated, right?
Yeah.
And how that can make us react to certain things. And so I always encourage people with ADHD, like we tend to have, not everybody, but a lot of us tend to have sort of a later circadian rhythm, right? Where they sort of get a second wind at like 11 o'clock at night. And if you have a job that's at 8 in the morning, that can, when you're young, you can probably handle it. But as you get older, that's not going to work very well. Yeah. I'm always encouraging people, look for jobs or look for careers where there's some flexibility with that. Maybe you don't have, like, unless you're there to open the shop, right? Maybe you don't have to get there right when it opens, as long as you get your work done. Yeah. That could be a possible reasonable accommodation depending on the work environment. People with ADHD are 5 times more likely to be entrepreneurs. And that is in part because we don't always work well in regular corporate structures.
Yeah.
But also because our brains are great at spotting patterns, and we see gaps where there is like I found the gap of there's nobody out there for middle-aged women talking about this, right? Yeah. That's what I do now. So, so if you have ADHD and you're kind of in that place of like, because if you really love what you do, sometimes that does make a difference in terms of whether or not you're an early or late person or whatever. But we tend to think of the 9 to 5 and that's the only thing. And it isn't. And we are out of the box thinkers and people with ADHD, because we kind of have to be. And so think about all the different things you could possibly do, or ways that you could maybe work with challenges you're having at work. Because I do feel that communication is always super important when it comes to workplace, relationships, et cetera. And so if you can come into work and say, look, this is where I'm really struggling. I know you really want me here at 9. This is why I'm struggling, et cetera. Could we possibly, maybe I can, just as long as I get my work done, is it okay if I come in a little bit later?
Yeah.
I can't obviously make promises about that kind of thing. And it always depends on your workplace, but don't feel constrained by what is neurotypical. You are not neurotypical. And I know we are asked to live in a neurotypical world, and that can be really challenging. But there are usually ways to sort of circumvent the challenges in a way, because as somebody who I'm hoping at some point to have employees, I want them to use their strengths. I want them to feel like they can flourish with me. And so if I don't need them there at a specific time, and they are going to be one of those people that's always, I'm going to be okay with it as long as they get the work done. I would rather them do the work when they have the best energy and the best focus, regardless of whether or not they have ADHD, because that benefits both of us. They're going to love what they're doing, and they're going to get better work out of it. Right. So I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but
it's okay. I agree with that too. And as someone who has had employees, I've always tried to be flexible with schedule to an extent, though. I think it's important to your point about kind of finding the structure that you fit in, because there are some jobs that just won't work. And
right, exactly.
That's okay. Find one that does offer you that flexibility. So,
and you deserve to have a job or a career or a relationship where you feel like you can be you.
Yeah.
And so often we try to just force ourselves into these boxes that we don't fit in. And we think there's something wrong with us. And it's not that. It's just we work differently. And you want to find that, like you just said, the work structure or whatever that's going to best work with how your brain works, so that you can feel like you're doing great work and you're proud of what you're doing. And whether it's you have a boss or you're the boss, like, everybody is benefiting on some level, because then it's a win-win for everybody.
Absolutely. Well, as we start to wrap up and we get off the talking about support, I guess I want to ask this question for anybody that's listening that maybe it's not them, but maybe they have children or a loved one or a partner who has ADHD or ADD. What do you suggest? Like, are there some very specific things that you suggest that people can do to support them?
So how I explain this to people is, while the rest of the world was born with a PC brain, we were born with Macs. And having the Mac brain is not the problem. The problem is that we were given the PC manual to work with.
So good.
Okay, so
such a good analogy.
Thank you. And so
such a good analogy.
And so we just have a different operating system, right? Like both Macs and PCs use PowerPoint, for example, but how they process the information is different, but you still get the same result most of the time, right?
Yes.
Right. And so it depends on what the person's challenges are, obviously. If you are a neat freak and you are with somebody who has ADHD, that is probably going to be a problem, because they're probably going to be disorganized. It's probably going to be more of a messy house, depending on the person. And so you either have to learn to love that about them, or that might not be the right person for you, right? If it's your kids, you can't just be like, well, this isn't working, sorry. But learning to say, okay, like both my kids struggle with this part of it, like, right, keeping the rooms clean, because they get overwhelmed, right? Overwhelm is a big component of ADHD as well. So then saying, okay, well, how can I help you to make this less overwhelming for you? Now, if they're anything like my kids, they're going to say, no, it's fine, I'll do it myself. They probably won't, but it's a way of just showing them, I'm here to support you. I want to be your partner in this.
Yes.
Like, so what is it? How can I best support you? Like, ask the person themselves, and they may not know in the beginning, and that's okay. But at least you've opened up that door of communication where they know that it's safe for them to communicate. Because unfortunately, there have been women who've been diagnosed and they have an unsupportive spouse who doesn't believe ADHD is a real thing and thinks they're just using it as an excuse to be lazy and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So if you got to find support wherever you can find it, whether it's friends, family, support groups. I have a Facebook group. There's like 30,000 women in this group. It's amazing. And it's not just women who have ADHD. It's also women who don't have it, but they're looking for ways to support women who have it, or support the people in their life who have it. But communication is always the best way. Learning how to communicate with each other. And this isn't even if you have ADHD, I think this is important in general. Like, not everybody communicates the same way. Not everybody receives information the way we think we're delivering it, right? But understanding that overwhelm is a part of it. And that doesn't mean that they're less than. It just means that is something that they struggle with. But also understand people with ADHD are great in emergencies, believe it or not, because it kicks in adrenaline, which is like a shot of Adderall. And we're like, okay, I'm doing this, you're handling that. And like, we just handle emergencies. And we have hyperfocus, which is also, it's actually a form of time blindness, but that's a whole other thing. But you can get a whole lot done in that time. But when you start to better understand what your partner or your kids or your friends' challenges are, right? Like, if you know they're always chronically late, instead of lecturing them about it, maybe just plan on saying, okay, be here at 7. No, they're probably going to get there at 7:10. That means you don't have to get there till 7:10.
Yeah.
Now you've learned to work with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So don't take it personally if they're not doing the things the way you want them to do it, because they're doing the best they can. And for those of you who have ADHD and have been struggling with this, I'm telling you, I see you and I know you're doing the best you can. And just the more you can learn about your brain and how it works, the better you can create these systems, and the better you can communicate to the people in your life where you're struggling and where you can get some support from them.
Really love the don't take it personally, because that was one that I really had to learn the hard way with my daughter. Mm-hmm. But that impulse control or lack of sometimes, and sometimes that looks like, no, everything's a catastrophe. So sometimes that looks like lashing out in the moment when something's going on, right? And now I know enough to just take a breath and let a couple of minutes go by and, have a different kind of conversation. Mm-hmm. But I think that's so important, because for many years I did take it personally and it was really hard. So I think making sure the other person knows that it's not about them. It's about the person going through it, or the person with that challenge that are trying to work through it themselves and they don't know how. Yeah. So that's important to know. So it's such great advice. Well, where can people find you the most? You're active everywhere, but if you were sending them somewhere.
If they are interested in coaching, they can go to joriehoulihan.com, and there's all the information about that. I do have the podcast called ADHD and with Jorie Houlihan. It's best brought up if you type in Jorie Houlihan and then ADHD, not the other way around. And I'm on Instagram, all those things. I offer courses every once in a while, and most of that stuff you'll find on my website. So
all the things and all the places. Well, you're doing some really great work, I just have to say. So I'm so glad that you identified the gap, because I think it's something that's, in a good way, starting to get talked about more. And I am glad you're part of that, because I think you have a lot to share. So thank you for taking the time today and sharing some of your information with us. I think it's been really enlightening.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really happy that you let me come on to talk about it.
Of course. My pleasure. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Message in the Middle. I hope you found something in this conversation that reminded you that you're not alone, and that midlife isn't about winding down. It's about waking up. You're not done. You're just becoming. If this episode speaks to you at all, please share it with a friend who needs to hear it. And if you're enjoying the show, I'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to leave a review. It really helps other women find this community and this podcast. Until next time, take care of yourself.